Sandeep sir, you can see the screen. All of you can see the screen.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we'll start, sir. Sandeep sir, we'll start.
Yeah, please. Yeah.
All right. Good evening to all of you. My name is Ranjeet Mishra. I'm Chief Industry Relations Officer at C3 Innovation Hub, IIT Kanpur. I extend very warm welcome to all our panelists today and all participants. Before we start today's interesting topic on energy sector, I would like to give a brief introduction about all the panelists, which is led by Professor Sandeep Shukla today, who will be moderating today's panel. Professor Sandeep Shukla is Program Director, Professor at IIT Kanpur. Shri T.K. Ramachandaran, who is our second panelist, is IS, Chairman, Indian Port Station. Mr. Kumar Narayan, VP Technology and MD, VMware Software India Limited. Mr. Rajan Luthra, who is Head Special Projects, Chairman Office at Reliance. Let me start with Professor Sandeep Shukla, who is today's moderator for the panel. Professor Shukla is currently a Professor of Computer Science and Engineering Department at IIT Kanpur. He was also Head of Department Computer Science and Engineering from 2017 to 2020. Professor Shukla has completed his PhD and MS from State University of New York at Albany. He completed his Bachelor's of Engineering from Jadavpur University, Kolkata. He is an IEEE Fellow and ACM Distinguished Scientist. He was the Editor-in-Chief of ACM Transactions on Embedded Computing Systems from 2013 to 2020. He is currently Associate Editor of ACM Transaction on Cyber-Physical Systems and Journal of British Blockchain Association. In the past, he has also served as Associate Editors at IEEE Transaction on Computers, IEEE Transaction on Industrial Informatics, IEEE Design and Test, and IEEE Embedded Systems Letters. Before joining IIT Kanpur in 2015, he was a professor at Virginia Tech, USA. He served as an ACM Distinguished Speaker and also IEEE Computer Society Distinguished Visitor in the past. He has authored over 200 peer-reviewed journal and conference paper and edited around 10 books. In terms of awards and recognitions, he has been awarded the Presidential Early Career Award in Science and Engineering in 2004, Bessel Award by Untold Foundation in 2009, a Distinguished Alumnus Award by Sunny Albany in 2007, a Ramachandaran Fellowship in 2015, and his major research interests are cybersecurity of critical infra, cybersecurity of IT/OT systems, and application of blockchain technology in security and privacy. Our second panelist, Shri T.K. Ramachandaran IS, is currently Chairman, Tuticorin Port Trust under Ministry of Port Shipping and Waterway, Government of India. He is also Chairman of Indian Port Association. He is member of Indian Express Service since 1991. In terms of his qualification, he is Bachelor of Technology from IIT Kanpur and Master of Technology in Computer Science from IIT Delhi. He is also Master's degree in Public Policy from Princeton University, USA, for which he was awarded World Bank Robert McNamara Fellowship. He has served the Government of Tamil Nadu in various capacities, including those of Secretary to Government of Highway, Minor Ports Department, Tourism and Religious Endowments Department. And he has also served Secretary to the Government of Tamil Nadu in Information Technology Department. In terms of awards and recognition, he has received several awards and citations from Government of India and the state government, including one from Deputy Prime Minister of India for his work in the field of land records commemoration. And his major interest area, his area of interest are development economic, sustainable development and environment, infrastructure and urban development, system management, e-governance, and public-private partnership model. He has authored several papers and books in these areas. He was among the first to write about the need for citizen identification number a couple of decades back. Our next panelist, Mr. Kumar Narayan. He is currently a VP Technology and Managing Director of R&D at VMware India. Ram holds a B in Mechanical Engineering from Anna University, Chennai, an MS in Mechanical Engineering, an MBA from University of Michigan. Prior to joining VMware, Ram has served in global leadership role at eBay, Yahoo, and Microsoft. He started his career in auto industry, US, developing a software solution for design and packaging of automotive suspension and powertrain systems. His expertise lies in product development, product management, and product marketing. He's been an advisor to enterprise, large and small, in the area of digital transformation, product strategy, and product marketing. His work involves digital transformation led by customer journey, managing product development organization, software product management, and product marketing for consumer and enterprise products, new market development in emerging markets, among others. Our last panelist, Mr. Rajan Luthra. Mr. Rajan Luthra heads special projects in Chairman's office at Reliance Industries. Over 3 decades, he has acquired proficiency in driving impactful technology innovation, risk management, and public policy initiatives. By professionally, he is a mechanical engineer. He holds executive MBA with specialization in national security and counterterrorism. He is deeply connected with global innovation ecosystem and is among the earliest adopter of transformative technologies such as RFID, biometrics, IoT, IP, video, drones, AI, and computer vision. Mr. Luthra has been part of leadership team at RIL corporate security function and also led the design and delivery of cutting-edge IoT solution for protecting all Reliance assets. Over 2 decades, he has engaged with Israeli tech startups and expertise. As an investment committee member, he's also led investment in more than a dozen early-stage tech ventures in big data, AI, IoT, EdTech, and many other similar emerging technologies, having appraised 800 plus startups. Mr. Luthra is a member of National Executive Council of FICCI and chairs its National Committee on Drones, supporting regulatory policy formulation and industry government academia collaboration. And he's also a member of trustee at Observer Research Foundation, India's leading global policy think tank, and has authored several papers and articles across industry sectors and technology domains. With these introductions, with our elite panel led by Professor Sandeep Shukla, I'll hand over the dais to him without wasting much time. Thank you so much for joining today.
Thank you, Ranjeet. Can you hear me, Ranjeet?
Yes, I can.
Can you give me a share screen option?
Sure, sir.
So, Mr. Ramachandaran, Mr. Narayanan, and Mr. Luthra, we are very grateful to you for making the time in spite of your usual busy schedule on a Saturday, on a Friday evening. We at the C3I Hub, we actually are organizing these web panels to create more awareness among people, especially technology people, so that they are more interested in this topics of cybersecurity. So C3I Hub is a cybersecurity innovation hub that was created by the Department of Science and Technology last year at IIT Kanpur. So part of our job is to, other than research, is to actually create awareness and prepare the next generation leaders and technologists in the area of cybersecurity, and this is very important. And one of the important problem that we work on in this center, in this hub, is the critical infrastructure cybersecurity. So when we do critical infrastructure cybersecurity, energy systems are one of the most important one, and we have been seeing various kinds of attacks on energy system in various countries, including in India. And we need to understand the threats. We need to understand the risks involved for not only businesses, but also for the national security. We also need to understand what preparedness we have in the country in terms of responding and recovering from such attacks. And also we need to understand what's the way ahead, how important it is, and how we should position ourselves with respect to cybersecurity, so that we are up for the challenge. We are up against a huge challenge, and we need to actually do that. So, so in terms of setting the context, for many of you already know this, but in terms of setting the context, I would like to show you a few stories that are very relevant and very concerning. around the world, including in India. So, and when we see these, we are often very worried. And the question is, are the businesses and the government equally worried? And if they are, what are they doing about it? And what they're not doing, what they should do as technology leaders. We look forward to your opinions and your views, and how you can influence the stakeholders to actually take more actions if necessary. So having said that, so I hope you can see my screen. So first story I want to show you is that in February this year, we came to know from the INSEAD Group's analysis that at least 8 power sector entities in India and 2 ports were sending out packets to command and control servers which are linked to China, whose domain names were purchased in China and whose IP addresses are linked to Chinese malware activities. So that's something that they reported this to the entities in India around 10th of February, and until 27th February, the packets were still going back to these C2C servers, command and control servers, which eventually the IP addresses were blocked, and the hosts inside this organizations were cleaned up. So according to INSEAD Group and Recorded Future people I spoke to, the activities seem to have stopped, but they actually don't stop. They actually change their IP addresses, and they change their modus operandi. So now there is a lot of talk about whether the Mumbai power outage that happened last year in October was cyber attack. And from what I understand from people involved, that it was not a cyber attack induced outage, but there were signs of cyber compromise in the load dispatch center, but it wasn't that that particular one was responsible for this outage, but it could. We also are seeing a lot of news. So this is from March this year from insurance report that global power grids are becoming increasingly vulnerable to cyber attacks, so which we already are starting to see. 2 years ago, we saw this D-Track malware presence, which is usually attributed to the Lazarus Group in North Korea, in the India's largest nuclear power plant, which affected the IT system. Didn't, as far I know, as far as I know, that they didn't go to the operational technology and control systems. Then we know the Ukraine power grid attacks twice in 2015 December and then 2016 December. And both cases, they claim that it is from Russia, but they were pretty extensive attacks damaging all kinds of equipments. First time by black energy malware, and second time by NotPetya ransomware. And this was probably one of the most well-known cases of power grid attack, which actually were attributed to cyber attack. So this was the second Ukraine attack. We saw, even before that, we saw Iranian cyber attack on New York Dam in upstate New York, and a similarly named dam, which is much bigger in Oregon, which was apparently the target, but they made a mistake and attacked a smaller dam, which did not create too much damage. Now this news is from 3 days ago. So here is the Black Lotus lab. They actually noted that there was an Indian power company, they didn't name them, which was affected by reverse rat Trojan, and was sending command and control, sending information to command and control server to IP addresses that are linked to Pakistani IP addresses. Now, it could be that China is using Pakistani IP addresses, or it might be that they are actually coming directly from the Pakistani cyber attackers. We all know about the Iranian nuclear plant attack 2009 that actually started this cyber weapons race. That is very, very clandestine attack that happened, and that happened in an environment which was disconnected from the internet. It was an OT environment that was disconnected from the internet, but it was induced by somehow making the engineers carry the attack vector through USB sticks that they were fooled into taking and connecting to the desktops which were connected to the OT network. And then we know that 2014 December, there was a German steel plant that was attacked with massive damage through cyber attack. We saw Saudi Aramco getting hacked by Iranians several times, some of them quite damaging. And then in December last year, it came to surface that for over 6 months, various US government departments, including the Homeland Security Department, were actually having this advanced persistent threat that was induced through supply chain compromise of a system called SolarWind. So that was a huge deal, because they penetrated through not only the more than 6 US government organizations, departments, but also companies like Microsoft, FireEye, etc. We saw in February this year the Florida water treatment plant being attacked. And since then, there are several other water treatment plant has been attacked through cyber attack. Now, in May this year, we saw the Colonial pipeline, the gas and oil pipeline, their IT system getting ransomware, and their ticketing system got affected, which actually directly gets fed by the OT system. And therefore, they had to shut down entire pipeline and creating a huge spike in oil price and supply problem in the eastern seaboard of the US. And we also saw last week that the Recorded Future again found that Indian government entities are being targeted through various cyber intrusions by a group that they codenamed Red Foxtrot, that is linked to the Chinese military. So, so having said that, so I would like to now. So the point here is that we understand that this is a major problem. Now, the question that I want to ask the panelists in the order of Mr. Ramachandaran, then Mr. Narayan, and then Mr. Luthra. In short, like in a couple of minutes, I would like to ask you that as executives in your organization, even if you are not in the energy sector, what is your perception of cyber threats and the corresponding risks to your business continuity? If you can just tell us about that, then we can get some idea about how people at various organizations are perceiving this problem. So, Mr. Narayanan.
Sure. Good evening, and thanks for having me here. Now, as VMware, we are a cyber infrastructure company. And so not only do we worry about our own cybersecurity issues, but we also have to protect our customers. We have about 500,000 customers around the world. So we see this all the time in terms of, and they are across sectors. So it's not any one sector that we see both the worry in the customers, as well as these being real issues that are coming up. And a lot of these attacks, as you rightly point out in all the examples that you gave, have a certain set of characteristics to them. They start off with a phishing or vulnerable software that the bad actors use to gain entry. There are characteristics of movement within the infrastructure once they're in. There are things that they do, whether it's exfiltration of data, sensitive data, or locking up of the data, as we have seen in some of these instances, and then attempting to erase logs on their way out. In some cases, they are done so quietly that people discover much later that they have been, attacked. And in some cases, it's a continuous process, and they discover that as they, their infrastructure gets locked up, and there is these ransom attacks that seem to happen. So it's a real problem, and it's a cat and mouse game, unfortunately, and both sides are trying very hard to protect and to defend and attack, and then figure out how it happens. I mean, it's fascinating to read some of these, deeper analysis of how these attacks happen and how they get discovered and then potentially remediated or not. And and as users of technology, you also, you start to worry about it constantly.
Okay. So what I'm hearing is that from where you stand, it's a major problem, and you consider it as a huge risk for you and your customers.
Yes.
Okay. So Mr. Ramachandran, how do you see it from your organization?
Yeah, so I will just speak about government in general and also about the ports maybe in particular. And in the context of COVID especially, and in the context of digital India and the fact that now we are in a much more connected world, it is extremely important that all the infrastructure that is in place to make all this happen, whether it's digital India or the all the other projects that have been taken up, it is extremely important that security is maintained, and especially because of COVID, where we are doing everything on the digital platforms, whether it is our file systems within the office, or whether it's sending mails or doing VCs or even managing our ports. We have RFIDs, like some of those technologies that have been listed. We have IoTs, we have biometrics, and then we are paying digitally. We are making payments. Everything is digital. Almost 90% of our work is now becoming digital. So when we speak of this kind of a digital ecosystem, obviously it's very important that the security features are in place, and we are very conscious of the need for security. So as pointed out, whether it's the people in the organization who need to become conscious of the need for greater security, and whether it's putting in processes, training and so on for ensuring that they are aware of what happens when there is a breach, or whether it's a question of putting in the right technologies, whether the firewall or encryption or whatever. And of course, I would also say that we must have the right institutional mechanisms for the purpose. That would be a fourth thing which I would add. For instance, we have at the national level things like CERT-In, and within each organization we have people like the chief security officer, cyber security officer, or the cyber security cell, and of course we also have the SOC and all that. So the entire ecosystem is now aware of why security is important, because we all know that even if there is a small breach, the entire organizational data is at stake, our privacy is at stake, our entire functioning is at stake. And like you said, there were a couple of breaches in February, and luckily we were able to respond reasonably, I think, without any loss of any kind. So I think it's extremely, and I've also worked in government of Tamil Nadu as IT secretary. So we had set up something called the CERT Tamil Nadu, on the lines of CERT in the site CERT Tamil Nadu. So there's a lot of need for people to collaborate, especially the government agencies, security agencies, private sector, to collaborate on this, to ensure that we exchange information, we exchange notes, and ensure that nothing is compromised. So I think we are at a very, very important point, in this entire journey. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Luthra?
Good evening, everyone. I think just continuing from what Mr. Ramachandaran was mentioning, there is a continual expansion of the vulnerabilities, right? With the digital platforms being deployed and digitization taking place. The vulnerability of all our assets is increasing day by day, and the threat landscape also, if you see on the other side, right, there is no longer a difference between cyber criminals as well as the non-state actors. So between, let's say, what is happening by some people who are, let's say, sponsored by some states as at the back end, versus some of the tools available with the cyber criminals, there is a very little gap there now. So the motives and the agenda and the motivation are all kind of merging together, if I can call it that. So whereby not only are the infrastructure sectors, but I think energy sector will remain at the center of most of these threats that we face today. On the other side, I think in terms of the kind of specific risks, while we all, I mean, you've already laid out a very wide spectrum of the kind of attacks that have happened. But I think as professionals in the industry, what we really need to be thinking of is the future landscape. What would be the evolving threats and the evolving issues that may come up, and how do we prepare ourselves for those? And I think in due course, we can talk about some of those countermeasures also.
Okay, so one thing that is even if you are not an energy sector organization, you actually are very much affected by energy, right? So without your power grid having power, or if there is a huge blackout, and then everything stops. So the question, so what my experience has been that a lot of our utilities are not very cybersecurity conscious, and there has been a very recent effort by the Central Electric Authority to actually create a cybersecurity regulation that would make requirements on the utilities to have certain cybersecurity controls and certain cybersecurity governance structure and strategy, policy document, etc., which is largely absent in most utilities in my experience. So therefore, what we are seeing is that they need a huge amount of resource injection, because many of the utilities are pushing back to resources to actually procure the corresponding software and you know, the monitoring software and you know, SOC and security incident event management system. And so CEA is currently thinking in terms of giving them guidelines rather than regulation right away, so they can actually use the guideline to kind of prepare themselves for the regulations to come, where they are actually legally bound to be putting in those cybersecurity controls and organizational strategy, etc. So my question would be that, given that power is a denominator for all of your organizations, you know, so do you see, do you think that first of all, the fact that we are going for cybersecurity regulations so late, where RBI did this for banks in 2015, and SEBI did this for all the securities exchanges, etc., for 2016, and now in 2021 we are talking about just guidelines, and in 22 we might be able to get the regulations in place, which would again then take 1-2 years to actually be in place, all the controls to be in place. So my question, and this question is kind of like provocative in the sense that, how do you respond to this delay in what I think is delay? Maybe you know, the perceptions may vary. How do you respond to the fact that we are so behind in protecting our energy sector cyber you know, preparedness? So I will start with Mr. Luthra.
Sure. I think rather than, you're absolutely right that the need for regulation is extremely important. At the same time, I have a slightly different perspective. I think today the realization of the cyber security related challenges is dawning not only on the security professionals, but even at the board levels. Mm-hmm. So the management teams and the CEOs of the companies, including in the power sector and the energy sector, are conscious that it is no longer a luxury to have cybersecurity being taken care of. So I think it's in my view, it is imperative that we don't only wait for regulations to come, but we do whatever is required to be done in any case on a let's say on a proactive basis. Number two, in my own understanding, I think a fair bit has been done when we talk about the National Critical Information Infrastructure Protection and all the other apparatus that have been put into place, including some that were referred to by Mr. Ramachandaran also. I think whether it's putting some of these, let's say, regulatory bodies, or whether it's putting some of the response mechanisms, or even within each government or private sector entity, I think it's four elements that we need to look at, right? So firstly, it's obviously some of the technical tools and the hygiene that you need to implement around the basic hygiene around cybersecurity. Number two, you also need to in parallel look at how exactly are your people not only there or the resources deployed, but are they really empowered to take decisions, which are, so when they raise a flag, right, what do you do about it? Number three, are you proactively looking ahead and looking at the intelligence that is out there? Today, there are many companies which are delivering you specific threat intelligence, and I mean, largely based on open source and, let's say, information from the deep web or the dark web. And finally, I think you also need to be able to educate the people by and large. And I think we'll need to discuss that in more specific details as well, because ultimately, I think the weak part is really the insider threat. And that is both from people who can be malignant insiders or even innocent people who really are not aware of the social engineering techniques, and they can cause vulnerabilities.
Right. Yeah. So it's absolutely right, and absolutely you told us about these four different things which are very, very important, especially the empowerment of the cybersecurity people in making decisions, and also the insider threat, which often is overlooked. I have seen in India a lot of the times the security is designed to actually only thwart the people from outside, and the insider threat is not looked into. So I would request Mr. Ramachandran to address this issue, that how you see the power sector, the kind of delay in which, in my opinion, is a delay in addressing the urgency of cybersecurity in power sector, given that power sector is the thing that you need in everything.
Yeah, so the question is specific to power sector, but I would first start from a very general, overall perspective. For instance, in credit cards, India was among the first countries in the world to implement a two-layer security system. You must be aware of that, right? There were people who came in from the US, and they were surprised that we had a PIN as well as, the usual password and all that. So this kind of system was introduced in India, I think almost 5 years or even more, even many more years before that. So I do not think that we are delayed as far as laws or institutional mechanisms are concerned. For instance, the IT Act. The IT Act is now more than a decade old, and the IT Act has many provisions which protect consumers. And so in banking, at least, we have been able to implement it very quickly. Now, unfortunately, the electricity sector has not really gone in for the kind of digitalization that you speak of in your presentation. For instance, smart meters. How many households, I do not have the figures now, but it might be in a single digit. How many households are actually connected by digital meters? How many EBs are actually able to implement reading of without sending, linesmen or whatever people to read the meter digitally or read them manually? How many electricity boards are able to do that? So the question, therefore, is unless the basic infrastructure is in place, then that's very ironic, Because what happens, and you know that again, if as long as databases are all discrete and they're not connected, and there is not too much of digitalization, everything is safe, because the sheer effort of trying to breach that is so huge because nothing is connected. But the more and more connectivity that you keep introducing into the system, the more and more it becomes vulnerable. Therefore, I think as we start becoming more and more connected, as we start making all these, putting in all these technologies that we talked about, and as we start making systems independent, they don't need manual interventions, they're all automatic. It will obviously be very, very important that we put all those security systems in place. I think we will be able to do it in parallel. I do not think we have had any major breach so far, and at least of the kind that we discussed, happening in the other countries. Perhaps it's because of lack of, having a single national grid, etc. All that is still happening, but I think we should maintain cognizance of the need for such security. And I think there is a heightened perception about the need for such security. That's what
Thank you. So I would say one thing here. So RBI, as I said, that RBI has been very insistent since 2015, and also the SEBI. So in the banking sector, actually, India's cybersecurity is quite advanced. And the other thing that I want to say is that although on the distribution side of power, that is metering and say smart meters and microgrids and renewable energy, India started much later. But in terms of the actual digitalization of the grid, started in early 2000. So we had 5 regional grids and state load dispatch centers and the regional load dispatch centers, and we had the national load dispatch centers, which are all connected to all utilities and getting real-time data from these things. And we have also digital relays in place in various, almost all transmission lines, and we have now 700 plus PMUs for last almost 5 years. So I think the transmission side is where I think the most worry is, because they can have the largest impact. And they're actually, it's been running. And in fact, the load dispatch centers, I don't have a SOC. So they are completely digital control, supervisory control, etc. But there is no SOC there. And they are now thinking about putting in SOC, which I feel a little bit, it's a little bit delayed, but your point is well taken, that from the consumer side of things, digitalization is not complete there, and therefore the surface in terms of customer premises, etc., by attacking smart meters, those chances are less. But I'll go to Mr. Narayanan for his view on this.
Sure. I think Mr. Luthra and Mr. Ramachandaran covered a lot of the details. But I think one thing to keep in mind here is I think digitization is rapidly increasing. I mean, I think the pandemic, the last year and a half, has showed us that we can be thrown into situations which are completely lights out type operations, and not just the energy sector, but every sector is now looking at that. How do you operate in this? When we talk about banking, but we also saw during the during the lockdowns and people working from home, is that a lot of the people who worked in banking, who worked in the bank, they were asked to work from home, and many of them were not set up for working remotely, right? So they were using their own personal devices to connect back into the bank and things like that. And we saw use cases which were never anticipated in the past. So I would say that, first of all, I think the fact that they've woken up to it and they're doing it for the energy sector is a positive. Better late than never, I would say, because I think the picture abhi baki hai, as they say, right? I mean, there's a lot happening in the space very rapidly. Second thing is, I think the use cases as we were defining them earlier, pre-pandemic, are changing quite rapidly. Where bring your own devices was not a normal thing for a lot of sectors, it is now becoming a reality. Second thing is we are connecting through inherently, networks that are, our home networks and Wi-Fi and all these other things, which are inherently, you have to assume that they're all compromised, right? I mean, how often does somebody patch their Wi-Fi networks at home, or even apply patches or upgrades to their routers? So we have to assume that everything, zero trust needs to operate, right? I mean, also at the infrastructure side. The third is, I think, regulation is one thing, but waiting for that is probably not the right answer. I think you have to assume that you will get breached. And hence, what do you do? And to Mr. Luthra's point that this is now needs to be a board level discussion. We don't see this. I mean, maybe in energy sector and some of these more critical sectors which are more well defined, but we see this even in the in the new age companies where you open the newspaper on a daily basis and you read about breaches. I mean, all of our personal information is floating around somewhere on the dark web, right? We have to assume that. And this has not necessarily become an important dialogue at various levels. There is no liability at the board level, for example, in companies, at least not that I'm aware of in India, which means that you don't have to necessarily reveal that you've been breached. And you can pretend, I don't know who you'd be fooling if you do that, but you can pretend like you have not been breached, which I don't know if that's necessarily the case. So I think the important part here is preparing. Start to work with the assumption that you will get breached or you've already been breached, and then put the remediation measures in place that will help you actually overcome it if and when it gets discovered or happens. So that's the way I would look at this, is that it's not necessarily a bad thing that people are waking up to it and starting to work on it.
All right, thank you. So I actually got breached through Domino's database and also Big Basket database breach twice this year. So fortunately the credit card information wasn't there. So but it is actually quite, as you said, that they are not taking cybersecurity seriously. They're not encrypting the information in their database. Various things we can talk about all day. So the next question I had was that what is your perception of the readiness? But I think we already covered this. Now the last question before we take up questions from the audience is that from your experience, if you have to talk to the CEOs of power sector or energy sector companies, which includes also gas and natural gas and oil and all that companies, and given that you are dependent on them for various reasons, you are kind of their customers to say. So how would you what would you advise them, or what would you tell them? For example, I personally would ask them, what is your cybersecurity policy? And I know the answer. In most cases, there will be no written policy, right? So we recently wrote a cybersecurity policy for a public sector organization because they didn't have one. So I would ask them, like, show me your policy. If they cannot show, then I will give him some piece of my mind. But you are much more mature than me. So and you know how to get the best out of people. So I think I would ask you, like, how would you advise such people, like at the highest level of this energy sector companies, in terms of their cybersecurity? What would you ask and what would you advise? So I'd request Mr. Ramachandran to start.
So just on a lighter note, to add to what Mr. Ramkumar said, there are only two kinds of people in the world, it is said, those who have been breached and those who don't know they have been breached. So almost all of us, I'm sure, at some point of time have been, our computers have been breached in some form or the other, and we don't know about it. So my advice or whatever suggestion would be that assume that everything is or can be breached. That is the fundamental point on which we have to premise this entire exercise on. Number one. Number two, technology. We have to use technology. After all, Israel, when you look at Israel, the only thing that you learn is, technology can do so much. So whether it is electronically or physically securing your servers, all that is absolute must. You must do all that. The second thing is training. Now, I know organizations where they have the best technology, but the people who are managing that technology don't know how to read the lock. or even if they know, they don't do it. It's not done regularly. I mean, these are basic things that should be done by the system administrator or the network administrator. Then ensuring that you have the right firewalls, detection systems, etc., etc. All that is extremely important. Invest in security. Sometimes I find that in the same organization, especially in government, I still find there are people who are using Fox-based systems. You know, I mean, when we have progressed from so many levels of RDBMS across the world, you're still using old systems. You're still using Windows-based systems, even MS-DOS-based systems. And the net result is that generations of systems all existing at the same time, all at different levels of vulnerability. And like you said, BYOD is again another extremely vulnerable kind of a situation. So you have to do an audit, a security audit is very, very important. I often get people, say from IIT or someone, to come and do an audit in my organization. Ensure that you tell me, you do a VAPT, you do an audit and tell me where are the vulnerabilities. And you don't do it once and then say, okay, now everything is okay. No, you have to keep doing it. I think periodically, you have to keep asking outsiders to, the outside agencies to tell you where the vulnerabilities are, and you have to act on those vulnerabilities. You should not simply get the audit report and sit on it. And finally, you should have a plan, a disaster management plan in place. And like any other disaster management plan, it would include planning, prevention, mitigation, and response and post-response. You know, the entire disaster management cycle that you have to put in place. And you should have, like I said, you should have a security operating center or SOC or whatever you call it. And you should have a system to for quick response the moment and several layers of response. Of course, that is an entirely different, an entire day's topic. So all these things I think should be put in place.
Okay, thank you. So Mr. Narayanan.
Yeah, so I mean, that's, Mr. Ramachandran has pretty comprehensively covered a lot of the areas that we need to do. So I think I would just, echo the same thing, start formulating the best practices. You don't wait for something to happen, right? I mean, or you don't wait for regulation to happen. There is enough and more information available to start doing this. If you don't have the expertise in-house, there are a lot of organizations which are available to actually help you do this. Run your risk assessments on a continuous basis, including, vulnerability assessments and risk prioritization, risk management, and reduce your surface area. I mean, separating out your architecture of your networks, to ensure that you're separating out your IT and OT, creating air gaps between your OT and IT infrastructure. So that, I mean, the architectural elements is, we didn't discuss it as much, but on the, it's not just about implementing, digitization. It is also, being thoughtful about how you're implementing and architecting your overall network. And then third area would be controlling access. I mean, remote access based on least privilege, not just a VPN based access. I mean, you need to be able to create layers. Don't allow free run inside of anybody and everybody getting access to all kinds of data. Microsegmentation is it's a good practice where you're basically then quickly able to detect and remediate, right, without having to bring down your entire network in order to do that. And then, secure access service edge nowadays, especially for remote access, to ensure that, you are able to protect your assets as of, at every layer of the infrastructure, from ingress to egress, right? I mean, the entire piece of it. And then, like Mr. Ramachandran pointed out, continuously, evaluating your logs, taking a look, right? I mean, threat hunting, there's various things that can be done as best practices. And also your backups. I mean, that's the other piece, which is about regular data backup systems, asset inventory, tracking, to ensure that, you don't have, like you said, old machines, old software, old operating systems, all sitting inside the network, which have never been looked at for ages just because they were working, right? I mean, there is a lot to be done, and it is not to be taken lightly. I mean, it is a continuous exercise, and it needs to go on, right? I mean, there's no end to this.
All right, thank you. So, Mr. Luthra?
I think just supplementing some of the pieces that have already been spoken about, maybe slightly different perspectives. So I think when we talk about tons of information available out there, but specifically one such document that we went through and we have tried to take some best practices from, specifically for the oil and gas sector, is a World Economic Forum report that was published in May 2021. It is actually a cyber resilience playbook, and it's directed at the board level people. And this cyber resilience playbook lays out 10 general principles and 6 specific principles for the oil and gas sector. And I have found this report to be extremely educative in terms of being able to provide you details of how to build your cybersecurity program and strategy, because that should be really the starting point, as you also pointed out. Number 2, apart from these and all that is laid out, does not need extensive budgets. Obviously, you need budgets for technology, but many of those practices can be simply put into place even without having large budgets. 3 or 4 specific points from some of our learnings. Number 1, I think sensitization of not only your own employees, right down to the last level, but also your third-party vendors and vendor employees. I think that is very, very important, because it's all a connected, one integrated, connected system. If you don't sensitize everyone down the line, that will always leave you vulnerable. Number 2, I think conducting a simulation exercise, right? You keep frequently do you simulate them and play out your wargaming scenarios, for example. So play out your worst case scenarios, do those simulations, see how people react, and be prepared for when a worst case situation happens. We already spoke about the need for having red teaming exercises and having third-party independent audits, but they not only should the audits be done, but I think the gaps that were identified in the audits, it should be actually reported to the board or the CEO level, and they should be closed out in a very systematic manner, right? And finally, in my view, once again, the critical part really is that when you have been breached, how quickly can you know that you have been breached so that you can respond and react on a very proactive basis. So there are, once again, tools that we have spoken about. You yourself mentioned about a couple of them, and I think those tools should be utilized to be able to get to know at the quickest that you have had something negative that has happened, and now you need to plug in, even if you were not able to realize the issue in real time. Because all of these social engineering techniques start from, let's say, a breach at one point. Even the attackers take a few weeks or a few months to fully penetrate into your systems. So the early warning will always help you in recovering fast.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Luthra. So I think that we have a very good, ideas from all of you to consider, what the energy sector companies should do. Actually, these are advices that any sector companies can use actually for bettering their cybersecurity. Now, at this point, I see a lot of questions, so I will start, trying to take them and direct them to some of you. So, first question that I hear a lot is that our PSUs are only allowed to go for L1 vendors. And then in that case, how do you ensure cybersecurity, quality, etc., in such cases? You don't have a lot of choice with respect to the quality if you have to go for L1. So
can I respond to that?
Yeah.
I think quite honestly, it is L1, but only after you have pre-qualified some people. Right? So as long as your RFP is good enough and your technical or pre-qualification criteria are good enough, you then are comparing maybe an apple to an apple. But I think it's really depend on how well your RFP has been qualified.
Correct. So I think that that question is often not asked, but I think the prices are not even looked at until the technical qualification is done. So I think that unless you write your RFP sloppily, you should be able to take out those companies which don't qualify with respect to security effectiveness.
Absolutely. And just to supplement, absolutely, there is no question of L1 becoming a excuse for not having security. I find that the most ridiculous thing. And secondly, there are other methods. If you are so concerned about getting only good companies, there is the other QCBC, quality and cost based bidding systems and all that, which can be used.
Right. Okay. So another question is that from Ashwini Palial, who is asking, how can startups who are working on infrastructure cybersecurity reach out to government and relevant authorities to do pilot? So, Mr. Ramachandran, you were IT secretary, so you might be.
So when he talks of pilots, is he relating it to security or is he relating it to general software?
No, he's talking about infrastructure cybersecurity products.
Yeah, so there are, one of the most popular methods is to get into the startup warehouses that governments run. Telangana has one, Tamil Nadu has one, Karnataka has one, and these are usually run in association with organizations like NASSCOM, if you know, and they are very well run, and some of the most successful startups have approached government through these organizations. So I would suggest that you tie up with those startup warehouses.
All right. So next question is pretty long. So let me see. Okay. So next question is actually not a question, but a comment that lack of visibility of existing vulnerabilities at senior leadership level needs to correct. So focus needs to be on fixing vulnerabilities and time to remediate needs to improve, etc., etc. So I think this is not a question. So there's here is Mr. Kulot, who is a CEO of NAP ID cybersecurity startup from Chennai. So she is asking how to reach the right security officers of various government departments to show demo and benefit of how our product can secure the business from breaches. I guess the answer would be the same as before. To go through.
Yeah. No, I see what happens is often the consciousness about security really needs to be increased among government organizations. There is absolutely no doubt about that. And often it is the chief information officer or the EDP head or the IT head who also doubles as the security person. So I would suggest that if you have particular technologies or if you have particular concerns, right at the RFP stage or right at the pre-bid stage, you should put it all upfront. We've done a recent tender in IPA for the National Logistics Portal, and we had almost some 30 companies bidding for it, and they had so many different suggestions, and we did incorporate number of them, of course, as long as they were vendor neutral, to the extent that they were vendor neutral and they were not particularly vendor driven. So as long as they are neutral, we do incorporate them and ensure that any new security feature from across the world is incorporated at the pre-bid stage. So I would suggest that you must always do that when you go for be prepared and ensure that you read the tender document carefully and ensure that you suggest that these new technologies be included. It will be done.
Thank you.
Dr. Shukla, sorry, I need to leave now.
Yeah, so thank you so much.
Stop, but thank you so much. I've really enjoyed this.
Others don't mind for answering a few more questions. I request them to stay. And Mr. Luthra, very grateful and hope to engage with you later.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rajanji. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Okay, so the next question is, are there intrusion detection and other proactive security testing frameworks currently being employed in the Indian critical infrastructure sectors? So my impression is in certain utilities they have, I know certain utilities in Delhi and Calcutta, etc., but not all utilities. That's my experience. If you have any other comments on this, any of Mr. Narayanan or Ramachandran?
I don't have enough visibility to know that aspect.
Okay. Yeah. So next question is from Shweta Ketu, who is saying, what are the challenges in setting up cybersecurity cells in large companies? How tough is it to sensitize staffs regarding cybersecurity hygiene?
Yeah, so I think I think we have covered this in the earlier in the discussions. I think setting it up is not easy, but it is also an area that everybody is waking up to. That I think there's enough information out there, and there's a lot of press around this topic. So I think boards of companies are waking up. The executives of companies are waking up. Now, the point about education, I think that's that is part of the run book, if you may, to set up a cybersecurity infrastructure and the remediation measures within the organization. For example, simulation, we talked about that. Part of that simulation is educating your employees by sending them, test phishing emails. I mean, they do that for us in our own company. We get this periodically, a mail will come, which is looking very attractive to click on. But when you click on it, they'll tell you that you made a mistake. And then there is also mechanisms for people to submit emails that are looking suspicious to the IT department of companies, so that they are able to then detect that, record it. If it is indeed a phishing email, then they can record the details of where it's coming from, etc., and then submit that back to security authorities so that they can actually track these things. So I think it's a 360 view in terms of what needs to happen across the organization in order to set this up. Now, there's always a start point. And I think that's the more important part, is that first is waking up to the reality that it is needed. Second is starting to set up an operating plan and getting people who understand how to do this. If you don't have people within the organization, getting organized companies that will do this for you, can help set it up, etc., and start to work on it. Right. So it's a process, and you have to take it through through the process.
All right. Mr. Ramachandaran, you have anything to add to that?
No, I think comprehensively answered. Yeah, thank you.
So there is a similar question, the next by Yash. How can India enhance cyber defensive skills in today's cyberspace? So I guess, it's a matter of, creating. So let me say that IIT Kanpur has started an MTech and a Masters of Science by Research degree in cybersecurity from this coming fall semester. And we are actually introducing, and the launch date is not yet known, a e-masters in cybersecurity, which is completely online with 12 modules. And you will get a e-masters, I don't know if they will call it a degree or certificate. So there are other organizations which are also doing that. So I guess there is a lot more needed, but we are getting there. Anything to add from the panelists? Yeah.
No, in the last couple of decades, this emphasis on disaster management, as you might have seen, how disasters are managed. You brought in the NDRF and the state disaster relief forces and all that. All this has happened in the last 20 years. On a similar lines, I think we need to go in for disaster preparedness, whether it's on security breaches and all that. So computer security, disaster management, disaster preparedness, the entire thing, we have to set up the institutional mechanisms for that. And like you rightly said, whether it's training or sensitization, we have to do all that. And then we have to keep teams ready. We have to keep technologies ready. The entire thing works, have to be put in place.
Right. Yeah. So I think that CERT in currently is kind of the point of reference for the disaster management. But given the vast country we are, and then given the number of cyber attacks increasing, we need a lot more people and lot more infrastructural support for disaster management in cyber arena. So next question is from Sudhir, who is asking, who is saying that there are cyber experts in India, but they're scattered. What is the view of the panel on bringing experts under one umbrella? So any thoughts on that?
There are forums which are getting set up for CISOs across companies and areas like that, which are starting to aggregate these experts as well. So I think NASSCOM has, under the DSCI umbrella, has started to do this. They work both on policy advocacy as well as starting to look at, how do you bring together, people or organizations that can help other companies set this up. So I think there is a lot of information starting to be generated, and that may be a good starting point.
Yeah, so I think there are forums that are there. So of course, people have their own. You cannot bring all experts under the same umbrella, I guess. But they exchange information, exchange best practices, etc. in this forum. So that's something we can think about. So there is another question. I think this was addressed before: how we secure the OT network when they are very old, even not patchable, because they won't tolerate downtime. So that's that's a major problem in OT systems, I guess. Any response to that?
Take them out of your network. I mean, that's a very simple answer, because you can't keep old systems running forever. I mean, most of these are probably no longer supported. Operating systems are no longer patched. There is active work. Every company or organization that puts out these operating systems, there's a finite life to them, and trying to stretch them beyond that is not going to help. In doing that. Having said that, there are embedded systems. I mean, there are, that is part of your continuous audit and assessment of your security posture and of your audit trails of your assets, to figure out what you have within your network. I mean, that's a starting point. You need to have a good asset inventory to understand what you have, and then you need to start putting the plans in place in terms of end of lifing some of them and bringing in new infrastructure to replace it. And that's a continuous process, and it needs to be managed. I think there is a part of digitization is the responsibility that comes with it. And I think this is part of that responsibility. You can't just deploy it once and forget about it. It's not going to happen.
Right. So I remember that when the NotPetya WannaCry ransomware hit the British Health and Human Services, it turns out that they were all using Windows XP beyond its support lifetime, and the reason was later on given was that there were too many XP machines and they could not afford to replace them with the new operating system, and therefore and this XP version had this SMB vulnerability that was exploited, and there was a large-scale ransomware attack there. So I guess at that point, Microsoft actually came out and gave patches for XP to at least patch that particular problem, because a lot of ATM machines were also running on XP. But I guess there is a need for board level decisions to actually upgrade the OT system to the later technologies which are under support and which has the protection mechanisms, etc.
Yeah, I mean, one of the growing trends is to move towards more hosted systems.
Yeah.
Cloud-based systems, hosted desktops. So you don't have to deploy an endpoint across your organization all the time, and you're able to remediate it better, in the sense that even if you have hosted desktops, even if you're accessing them from old machines which are no longer supported, at least that can be encapsulated and protected for the rest of your network. So I think those are the mechanisms that companies which have aging systems are a quick way for them to upgrade. Of course, there is still a cost involved. It's not free, but it is an easier mechanism to scale for the future if you're not having to deploy and manage these individually. And I think that is where we see a lot of companies moving towards, especially the more traditional companies. They're starting to deploy cloud-based desktops and using that as a mechanism to end of life, aging machines that they have, or enabling their own employees to access their networks from outside the firewall. I think that's the other piece, because that's going to be a reality. I mean, working from home is not going to go away in the near future. And you have to be able to allow people to come into your network from outside to do the day-to-day job. And that's where we see a trend moving.
Yeah. So one thing I want to mention, Ashwini Paliawal, yeah, you wanted to know certain things. So I'd request you to reach out to Ranjeet offline, and he might actually connect you to some of us, or uh, uh, we'll see how we can help. The one last question, I guess, is that we made great strides in national level policies on women representation, new wage policy, CSR funding goals. What do you think, and what will it take to make cyber and infrastructure security a mandated obligation of the board to really move from intent to work on threats to actually being serious and assumed and assured that we have robust risk mitigation plans in. So I guess the question is in the context of Indian corporate laws, and whether we can build in some kind of a requirement or a legal clause that boards have to take this in a certain with certain responsibility. So, Mr. Ramachandran, you are the IAS.
No, I would simply say this, that if the board does not understand risk, then they don't deserve to be there. No, a company should understand risk, and any company that does not strategize around risk is in for a shock, firstly. Number two, these are all not legislated. A company's risk profile, the company understands better than anyone else. And if you think that this can be legislated, then it will end up in a different, totally different ball game. We know what happened with CSR. We know what happened with the amendments to the Companies Act. And when criminal provisions were introduced, and finally they had to be removed, because these things are not done through legislation. They are done through sensitization, and each company should decide for itself how it wants to mitigate its own risk, because it's a question of survival. And this does not, if it comes through mandate, it often, even if you bring in a mandate, who is held responsible? It is the board. And if you hold the board responsible, tomorrow what will happen? It will become a crime. And if it becomes a crime, what happens? You go to jail. So that's not the intention of any any kind of business environment anywhere in the world. So it is something that you have to personally be aware of and take adequate cognizance of, and take responsibility for, and preventive measures.
Yeah, thank you. So, Mr. Narayanan, you have a view on this?
No, I think Mr. Ramachandran covered it very, very well. I mean, not everything can be legislated. Like I said, if you're waiting for legislation to come up before you start to take action, then it may not be the right approach.
Right.
And it's not a the risk assessment is one thing. It's not a responsible thing to do if you're managing an organization to be thinking that way. And waiting for that, I like Mr. Ramachandran pointed out, the threat shouldn't be you have to go to jail before you think that you have to do something about cybersecurity.
Right. Yeah. So I think that one of the things is that even for CSR, I think sensitization was more important than legislation. I see a lot of innovative ways they actually channel the CSR funds. Sometimes they give it to us also, the universities, but with a lot of strings attached and all that stuff. So I think that legislation is not necessarily a solution to cybersecurity. So it's a matter of creating awareness, creating understanding of the interconnectedness of things. Like if you don't get attacked, maybe what you are dependent on, or what depends on you will get also compromised, and your entire existence will be under threat, or some kind of a problem. Especially in the energy sector, our existence will be in trouble if we get a huge cyber attack with huge blackouts and so on. But with that, I think we have taken more time than we requested our panelists. So I must thank them, and I must say that they have taken out time from their very busy schedule and made their knowledge and experience available to us. And we hope to get them again on some other webinar and discuss more about cybersecurity, and hope the audience got something out of this and got some awareness and understanding of the challenges and issues and what is being done and what is in the purview of law versus what is purview of the social awareness and knowledge dissemination. So with that, I will request Ranjeet to give the vote of thanks, and then we look forward to our next webinar.
Thank you, Sandeep sir. Thank you, Mr. Narayan, and thank you, Mr. Ramachandaran. I would like to extend my gratitude to all distinguished panelists and participants. Would especially like to thank all our delegates for sharing their valuable time and sharing the perspective on cybersecurity preparedness for India's energy sector. We would soon be coming back with more interesting topics in cybersecurity space. Thank you all again, and have a nice evening and nice weekend. Thank you. Thank you so much, all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Namaskar.
Thank you. Namaskar. Thank you.